The stars hung cold and distant in the observation deck as Commander Day 1 Park stared out into the endless black. His reflection stared back at him, tired eyes and graying hair that made him look older than his 43 years. Behind him, the soft hum of the ship's engines provided a constant rhythm that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. "Commander, we're approaching the neutral zone," Lieutenant Han Kim said from the doorway. The young officer stood straight, his uniform crisp and his expression serious. "The Vrax fleet is already waiting." Day 1 nodded slowly. 32 years? That was how long humanity had been part of the Galactic Council. 3 decades of peace, of careful diplomacy, of proving to the galaxy that humans were reasonable beings who preferred words to weapons. Every species in the Council had their role. The Tarn were merchants. The Keller were explorers. The humans were peacemakers. "Good," Day 1 said quietly. "Let them wait a little longer. It gives them time to think instead of react." Hyan's jaw tightened slightly. The lieutenant had never hidden his feelings about their mission. He thought humanity was too soft, too willing to bend, too eager to please species that saw kindness as weakness. But he was a good officer, and he kept his opinions to himself when it mattered, down in the medical bay. Captain Mingi Choi was checking supplies one more time. She ran the medical frigate, Mercy's Hand, a ship designed to treat wounded from any species in the galaxy. Her crew of 43 included some of the best doctors, nurses, and medics humanity had ever trained. 28 of them were women, including Dr. Sora Lee, who was currently organizing trauma kits with the focused intensity of someone who had seen too many preventable deaths. "Do you really think they'll listen this time?" Sora asked without looking up from her work. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. Checking each kit for the 3rd time that morning, Minji paused, a bandage pack in her hand. "They have to. The Council made it clear that continued aggression will result in sanctions. The Vrax need trade routes more than they need territory. Vrax see mercy as weakness," Sora said softly. "They've said so in every negotiation. Their culture celebrates strength and conquest. They kill their own wounded rather than waste resources treating them. Which is exactly why we need to show them a different way," Mingi replied. She believed that deeply. Believed that seeing humanity's compassion, their dedication to preserving life, would eventually change minds. It had worked before with other species. The Kelmar had been raiders once. Now they were partners in a dozen humanitarian projects across the galaxy. The negotiation site was a small moon in neutral space. It's chosen specifically because neither side could claim it as territory. 3 human ships approached from one direction. 7 Vrax warships waited from the other. The size difference was intentional. The Vrax wanted humanity to know they were outgunned, outmanned, out of their depth. Commander Day 1 led the delegation himself. 37 humans in total, including security personnel, medical staff, and diplomatic advisors. It was standard protocol for these kinds of talks. Show that you come in peace, but bring enough people to handle emergencies. Among the delegation were 15 combat soldiers, 23 of whom were women, and several medical personnel who insisted on coming because they wanted to help treat Vrax wounded if negotiations led to a ceasefire. The Vrax. Warlord Thax stood waiting in the negotiation chamber. He was massive, easily 3 meters tall, with gray-green skin covered in ritual scarring. His eyes were small and dark, set deep in a face that seemed permanently twisted in contempt. Around him stood his command staff, all warriors, all armed, despite the protocols that called for peace talks to be conducted without weapons. "Humans," Thax said, his voice like gravel grinding against stone. "You come again with your words and your weakness. You offer medicine to our enemies. You speak of peace, while we take what is ours by right of strength." Day 1 kept his expression calm. "Warlord Thax, the territories you're claiming belong to the Pelin colony. They're protected under council law. Continued aggression will result in sanctions that will cripple your trade networks. We're offering you a way to gain what you need without war. We need nothing from species too weak to fight for what they want," Thax replied. He looked past Day 1 to where Captain Mingi and Dr. Sora stood with the other medical personnel. His lip curled in something that might have been a smile. You even bring your females to war. In our culture, females are for breeding, not battle. That you waste them in uniform shows how little you value strength. Lieutenant Hyan's hand moved toward his sidearm, but Day One raised one finger slightly. The gesture was enough. Hyan's hand stopped, though his face flushed with barely contained anger. In human culture, Day One said evenly, we value capability over gender. Some of our finest soldiers, doctors, and leaders are women. That you fail to utilize half your population shows a weakness in your own thinking. The insult was mild, delivered with diplomatic courtesy, but Thax's eyes narrowed. Around the chamber, his command staff shifted, hands moving to weapons. The air grew thick with tension. Perhaps Thax said slowly, humanity needs to learn what strength truly means. What happened next occurred so fast that later, when investigators reviewed the recordings, they had to slow them down to see the sequence of events. Vrak soldiers poured into the chamber from hidden doors. Human security responded instantly, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The fight lasted less than 4 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 37 humans lay unconscious on the floor, struck by stun weapons rather than killed. It was deliberate. Thax wanted prisoners, not corpses. Not yet, Commander Day One woke in a cell with his hands bound behind his back. His head throbbed where he'd been struck. Around him, he could hear the sounds of others waking, groaning, calling out to each other. He managed to sit up, his vision swimming, and took stock of the situation. They were in a Vrak's prison ship. The walls were bare metal, cold, and unforgiving. Through the bars of his cell, he could see other cells, other prisoners. He counted quickly. Everyone was alive. That was something, Commander. It was Haon's voice, rough with pain. What do we do? Day One closed his eyes briefly. He thought about Earth, about the Council, about 3 decades of careful peace. He thought about how humanity had worked so hard to be seen as civilized, as reasonable, as the species that could be trusted to find peaceful solutions. We wait, he said quietly. Protocol says they'll use us as leverage for concessions. The Council will negotiate. We'll be home soon. He believed it as he said it. Had to believe it. Because the alternative was unthinkable. Across the galaxy, news of the capture spread quickly. The Galactic Council convened emergency sessions. Species that had fought with humanity, been saved by human medics, negotiated treaties with human diplomats, all urged patience and calm. The Vraks would make demands. Terms would be discussed. This was how civilized species handled such situations. On Earth, families received notification that their loved ones were prisoners. Parents, spouses, children, all told to remain calm, to trust the process. To believe that their government and the Council would bring them home safely, and in the cold darkness of space, incels aboard of Rock's warship, 37 humans waited. Among them, Captain Minji Choi held Dr. Sora Lee's hand through the bars that separated their cells. Neither spoke. There was nothing to say that would make this better. They didn't know yet what was coming. None of them did. Not the prisoners, not the Council, not Earth itself. They still believed in peace, in diplomacy. In the idea that reason would prevail, they still believed the galaxy played by rules that meant something. They would learn otherwise soon enough. 3 weeks passed in darkness and cold. The Verks kept their prisoners in conditions designed to break spirits rather than bodies. Food came irregularly, always barely enough. Water was rationed. The temperature fluctuated wildly from freezing to sweltering, never allowing proper rest. Through it all, the 37 humans held together as best they could. Commander Day One kept them organized. Morning counts to ensure everyone was alive. Shared stories to keep morale up. Medical checks conducted by Dr. Sora Lee and Captain Minji Choi through the cell bars, treating injuries with nothing but words and determination. Lieutenant Hyun led exercises in the cramped cells, keeping bodies strong even as the situation grew more desperate. The Vrax guards found their unity amusing. They would stand outside the cells and laugh, pointing at the humans who refused to break down, who sang songs together in the night, who protected each other even when they had nothing left to give. Such devotion to weakness, one guard said in broken standard, the common language of the galaxy. You care for each other like children. No wonder your species achieves nothing. On Earth, the government worked frantically through diplomatic channels. The Vrax's demands were extensive. Territory concessions, trade rights, technology transfers. The Galactic Council urged acceptance, arguing that lives were worth more than pride or resources. Humanity prepared to agree to almost anything. Anything to bring their people home. But Warlord Thax had no intention of letting them go. On the 21st day of captivity, Vrax soldiers came to the cells. They carried weapons and recording equipment. They pulled the prisoners out one by one, forcing them to their knees in a large cargo bay. Bright lights illuminated the space. Cameras recorded from every angle. Commander Day One's stomach dropped. He knew what was happening. Had seen it before in historical records, in the dark chapters of humanity's own past. This wasn't about negotiation anymore. This was about sending a message. Warlord Thax entered the cargo bay, his massive frame casting long shadows. He looked at the kneeling humans with open contempt. When he spoke, his words were broadcast across the galaxy. Sent to every council chamber, every news station, every corner of known space. The Vrax Empire bows to no one, he announced. We take what we want. We crush those who oppose us. These humans came to our territory with weakness, disguised as peace. They brought their females to war like offerings. Today, we show the galaxy what the Vrax do with offerings. What happened next was systematic and brutal. The women were separated from the men first. 23 female soldiers, doctors, and medics forced to one side of the bay while their male colleagues were held at gunpoint, forced to watch. Captain Mingy Choi stood straight, her jaw set. Dr. Sora Lee whispered something that looked like a prayer. The others held hands, drew strength from each other, refused to give Thax the satisfaction of seeing fear. The executions were public, methodical, designed for maximum psychological impact. When the women had all been murdered, Thax turned to the remaining 14 male prisoners. Commander Day One met his eyes and saw nothing there but cold satisfaction. Your turn, Thax said simply. By the time it was over, 37 names had been added to a list that humanity would never forget. The broadcast ended with Warlord Thax addressing the camera directly. This is what weakness earns in the galaxy. Humans are soft. They value peace over strength, life over victory. They are prey, pretending to be predators. Let this be a lesson to all who would oppose the Vrax Empire. The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, species watched in stunned silence. The Galactic Council immediately convened, voices raised in shock and condemnation. The Tarn ambassador called for immediate action. The Keller demanded sanctions. Every civilized species agreed that the Vrax had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And from humanity, there was silence. Earth went dark. Every transmission stopped. Every embassy closed its doors without explanation. Human ships in neutral space turned off their transponders and disappeared. The Galactic Council sent urgent messages demanding response, explanation, anything. Nothing came back. For 48 hours, humanity was simply gone. The galaxy mistook the silence for grief. They thought humans were too shocked to respond, too devastated by the loss to function. Some species expressed sympathy. Others worried about economic disruption. A few aggressive empires looked at human territory and wondered if this was an opportunity. None of them understood. What was really happening? On Earth? Emergency sessions of the unified government met in secure chambers, deep underground. Every nation, every colony, every human settlement across the stars participated. The vote was unanimous. It took less than 3 hours to transform centuries of political structure into something new, something focused, something the galaxy had never seen from humanity before. Military reserves activated worldwide. Millions of humans who had served and retired received recall orders. They came without hesitation, their faces grim, their purpose clear. Factories that had built medical equipment began retooling. Assembly lines that produced farming equipment started making something else entirely. In classified research facilities, scientists opened sealed vaults. Inside were technologies that humanity had developed but agreed never to use. Weapons that violated every treaty and convention. Systems that pushed the boundaries of what was considered ethical warfare. Projects that had been locked away because they were too dangerous, too destructive, too brutal for a species that claimed to value peace. The locks came off. The projects went active. Production began immediately. Lieutenant Haeon Kim, recently promoted to commander, stood in a military shipyard orbiting Mars. Around him, ships were being recommissioned at a rate that should have been impossible. Civilian transports were being converted to troop carriers. Merchant vessels revealed hidden armories. And the medical frigates, those gentle ships with their red crosses and their missions of mercy, were opening concealed weapon bays that transformed them into something else entirely. "How long have we been preparing for this?" a young officer asked, his voice shaky with the realization of what he was seeing. "Since the beginning," Haeon replied quietly. "Since the first day we joined the Galactic Council. We hoped we'd never need it. We prayed we'd never have cause to use it. But we always knew that peace only exists because those who can make war choose not to." Former Commander Daewon Park, now appointed Supreme Commander of Military Operations, addressed the unified government in a speech that was not broadcast, not recorded, and never officially acknowledged. His words were simple. "For 32 years we chose peace. We chose diplomacy. We chose to be what the galaxy needed us to be. We buried our history and pretended we were something else. But they murdered 37 of our people. They murdered our women and broadcast it to mock our compassion. They have reminded us what we are, what we have always been, what we tried very hard not to be." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of the leaders who would authorize what came next. "We are human. We are capable of great compassion and terrible violence. We have been both throughout our history. For 3 decades we showed the galaxy our better nature. Now they will see the other side. They will learn what it means to make humanity choose war." Across Earth, monuments began rising overnight. Simple structures of stone and metal, each bearing 37 names. Captain Minji Choi, Dr. Sora Lee, every single person who had died in that cargo bay. In every city, every town, every human settlement across the galaxy, the names were carved in stone. Remember the 30-7. It became a phrase spoken in every human language. A reminder, a promise, a threat. On the 3rd day after the executions, humanity finally responded. The message was broadcast to the Vrax Empire on all frequencies. It was not a negotiation. It was not a plea. It was a simple statement of fact. "You have 72 hours to surrender, Warlord." And every member of his command staff who participated in the executions. "Deliver them to neutral space for trial before the Galactic Court. After 72 hours, we stop asking."
Oh.
The message ended there. No threats. No demands for territory or reparations. Just those few words and a timer that began counting down. The Vrax Empire laughed. Warlord Thax himself responded with contempt, broadcasting his mockery for the galaxy to hear. "Humans threaten the Vrax. With what? Your tears? Your diplomatic protests? You are weak. You have always been weak. Come and take me if you can, but you will find only death waiting." The Galactic Council pleaded for calm. Representatives from a dozen species urged humanity to reconsider, to think about the cost of war, to remember their principles of peace and understanding. They received no response, only a few ancient species. Those who had been watching humanity carefully since they joined the Council tried to warn the galaxy what was coming. The Tarn ambassador spoke urgently to anyone who would listen. "We studied them," he said, his voice carrying genuine fear. "Studied their history, their psychology, their capability. Humans are not naturally peaceful. They chose peace. Do you understand the difference? They are the most violent species in their planet's history. They nearly destroyed themselves multiple times. They learned restraint, not because they were weak, but because they were too strong. And now someone has made them stop choosing peace. No one listened. The galaxy watched the timer count down with curiosity and concern, but no real fear. Humanity was diplomatic. Humanity was soft. Humanity cared about their people, which meant they could be manipulated, controlled. Kept in check, the timer reached 0, and the galaxy learned exactly how wrong they had been. The timer hit 0, exactly midnight, Earth Standard Time. For one long moment, nothing happened. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what humanity would do. The VAX military prepared for a limited response. Perhaps some missile strikes on border stations, maybe an attempt to blockade trade routes. Warlord Thax sat in his command center and laughed, confident in his superiority. Then the reports started coming in. Human ships appeared throughout Vrax space simultaneously. Not at the borders where defenses were strongest, but everywhere at once. Military installations, supply depots, communication hubs, ship construction yards. They appeared from nowhere, already in position, already firing. Impossible, a Vrax tactical officer stammered, staring at his display. They're using quantum jump technology. That doesn't exist. No species has cracked stable quantum jumping. But humanity had. They'd cracked it 17 years ago and kept it classified, locked away with all the other technologies they'd agreed not to deploy. The galaxy thought they knew human capabilities. The galaxy was wrong. Commander Hyun Kim stood on the bridge of the warship Retribution, watching his tactical display light up with targets. His fleet had jumped into the heart of Vrax territory, while the enemy was still trying to figure out how they'd gotten there. Around him, his crew worked with cold efficiency, each person focused on their task, each person carrying the names of the 37 in their hearts. All ships, weapons free, Hyun ordered. Disable, don't destroy. I want prisoners, not corpses. Show them how humans fight. The Vrax had assumed human medical frigates were exactly what they appeared to be. Mercy's hand in ships like it had traveled the galaxy for 3 decades, treating wounded, responding to disasters, providing humanitarian aid. What the Vrax hadn't known was that every single one of those ships had been designed from the start as dual-purpose vessels. The hospital bays were real, so were the weapon systems hidden behind removable panels and false bulkheads. Medical frigate Compassion, named after Mingi Choi's lost ship, opened fire on a Vrax battlecruiser. The enemy vessel's shields collapsed under the assault. Precision strikes disabled engines, weapons, and communication arrays without breaching the hull. Within minutes, the cruiser was dead in space. Its crew alive but helpless. It happened across 50 star systems simultaneously. Human forces moved with coordination that suggested decades of planning, because that's exactly what it was. From the first day humanity joined the Galactic Council, military strategists had been wargaming scenarios. What if peace failed? If they were attacked? What if they needed to fight? They'd planned for everything, and now those plans were being executed with devastating precision. Ambassador Krell of the Tarn Collective watched from his embassy ship, safe in neutral space, but close enough to monitor the battle. He'd tried to warn the Council, tried to explain what humanity really was. Now he watched his fears become reality. "Get me a direct line to the Galactic Council," he ordered his staff. "They need to see this. They need to understand what we're witnessing." His transmission showed the galaxy something they'd never seen before. Human military forces operating not with the desperate fury of a species fighting for survival, but with calm, calculated precision. They disabled enemy ships without destroying them. They jammed communications without killing crew. They dismantled the Vrax military infrastructure while minimizing casualties on both sides. "This is what terrifies me," Krell explained to the council members watching his feed. "They're not angry. Look at how they fight. This isn't rage. This is purpose. They're showing restraint even now, even after what was done to them. Do you understand what that means? It means this could be so much worse. It means they're choosing to fight this way. That choice is more frightening than any weapon." On the planet Vrax Prime, civilians watched the sky fill with human ships. They'd been told humanity was weak, that their military was symbolic at best, that the Vrax Empire could crush them easily. Now they stood in streets and watched their entire orbital defense network fall silent in less than an hour. Supreme Commander Day 1 Park commanded the operation from Earth itself, coordinating forces across dozens of light years with a strategic brilliance that military historians would study for generations. He'd spent 3 decades learning diplomacy, but he'd never forgotten his original training. Never forgotten that before he became a peacemaker, he'd been a warrior. "Status report," he ordered calmly. "Vrak's 3rd Fleet has surrendered," an officer reported. 6th Fleet is disabled and requesting quarter. 8th Fleet is attempting to regroup, but their command ship is offline. Accept all surrenders immediately. Treat all prisoners according to Galactic Convention standards. Make sure medical teams are standing by to treat wounded. I want every action recorded and broadcast. That was the key to Day 1's strategy. The galaxy was watching, and he wanted them to see everything. Every disabled ship was offered immediate medical assistance. Every surrender was accepted with dignity. Every Vrak's prisoner was treated according to the strictest interpretation of prisoner rights under Council law. The contrast with how the 37 had been treated became impossible to ignore. Human forces recorded everything. Vrak's wounded being treated by human medics. Vrak's prisoners being given food, water, medical care. Vrak's officers being addressed with respect even as they were taken into custody. The broadcasts went out across every channel, and the galaxy watched in stunned silence. "Why do you treat us better than we treated you?" Captured Vrak's officer asked Commander Hain after being moved to a human ship. He sat in a clean cell with adequate food and water, his wounds already dressed by human doctors. "We executed your people. We murdered your females. Why show us mercy?" Ewan looked at the prisoner for a long moment. "Because we're human. That means something. It means we don't become monsters just because monsters exist. We killed 37 of our people. We could kill every single one of you. But we won't, because that's not who we are." "Then you are weak," the officer spat. No, Hain replied quietly. "We're strong enough to choose mercy even when revenge would be easier. That's a kind of strength your species has never understood." The military campaign lasted 3 weeks. In that time, the Varax Empire's military capacity was reduced by 70%. Not through massive destruction, but through systematic dismantling. Human forces captured or disabled hundreds of Vrak ships. They shut down weapon production facilities. They destroyed military supplies while leaving civilian infrastructure untouched. And through it all, they broadcast every act of mercy. Every prisoner treated well, every wounded enemy given medical care, every civilian area they could have bombed but deliberately avoided. The psychological effect was devastating. Vrak soldiers began surrendering rather than fighting. Not because they feared death, but because they saw proof that humans would treat them better than their own leaders did. Vrak civilians, watching their cities remain intact while their military collapsed, started asking why their government had provoked this war. Warlord Thax raged in his command center as reports came in of another surrender, another disabled fleet, another installation captured intact. His empire was crumbling not because humans were more brutal, but because they were more disciplined, more advanced, and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. "How did they have this technology?" he demanded. "Where were they hiding this capability?" His intelligence officer looked at the data with something like awe. "Sir, based on the sophistication of their systems, they've had this capability for at least 2 decades. They've been among us the entire time with the ability to do this, and they never used it. They chose diplomacy instead. Chose." Thax's voice was dangerous. "They chose weakness." "Did they?" the officer asked quietly. "Or did they choose restraint?" "There's a difference, Warlord. One we're learning too late." Human forces closed in on Varax Prime itself. The home world was heavily defended, billions of civilians living on a planet surrounded by orbital weapons platforms and defensive satellites. It should have been impossible to take without massive civilian casualties. Supreme Commander Day 1 gave his orders with absolute clarity. "Surround the planet. Don't fire a single shot. We're going to give them a choice." The human fleet formed a complete blockade around Varax Prime, thousands of ships, all holding position, all weapons ready, but not firing. And then Day 1 broadcast a message directly to the Varax people. "We are humanity. 3 weeks ago, your leaders executed 37 of our people. murdered them publicly to demonstrate strength. We could destroy your world. Our weapons are targeting your cities right now. But we won't fire. We're giving you a choice that you never gave our people. Surrender those responsible for the executions, or watch your leaders destroy you out of pride. The decision is yours. The message ended. The blockade held. And on Vrax Prime, something unprecedented began to happen. The people, tired of war and seeing their military crushed by an enemy that refused to slaughter them, began to rise up. Not against humanity, but against their own government. Against leaders who had started a war they couldn't win, who had committed atrocities that brought this terrible response. In the streets of Vrax Prime, civilians fought their own military. Parents who didn't want their children to die for Warlord Thax's pride, workers who saw no future in continued resistance. Soldiers who had been captured and treated well by humans, then released to carry the message home that surrender meant safety, not death. The civil war that erupted across Vrax Prime lasted for days. In the end, it was Vrax civilians, not human weapons, that stormed Warlord Thax's command center. They bound him and his command staff with their own hands and brought them to the edge of their atmosphere, broadcasting their surrender to the human fleet. "We give you those responsible," the leader of the civilian coalition announced. "We want peace. We want to survive. Please, no more war." Commander Heon received the surrender personally. He took Warlord Thax and the command staff into custody, treating them with dignity even as Thax spat curses and threats. "You should have killed us all," Thax snarled. "You're weak. You'll always be weak." Heon looked at the warlord with something like pity. "We could have. We didn't. That's not weakness. That's civilization. It's what separates us from you, and it's why you lost." The galaxy watched as human forces accepted the Vrax surrender. Watched as they immediately began providing humanitarian aid to Vrax Prime. Watched as medical ships descended to treat the wounded from the Civil War. Watched as humans, who had every reason to want vengeance, chose justice instead, and across 1,000 worlds. Species that had thought they understood humanity realized they'd been wrong. Completely, fundamentally wrong. The Galactic Court convened on the neutral station Harmony Point, a massive structure built specifically for interstellar legal proceedings. It had been constructed 200 years ago, after the last major war. As a symbol of civilization's commitment to justice over violence, now it would serve a purpose its builders had never quite imagined. The trial of Warlord Thax and his command staff became the most watched event in galactic history. Every species sent observers. Every news organization broadcast continuous coverage. In homes across 1,000 worlds, beings gathered to watch humanity seek justice for their murdered people. The prosecution was led by director Jin-Ho Park, a human lawyer who had spent 30 years working in galactic civil rights law. He was small, quiet, methodical in his approach. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The courtroom was designed to accommodate multiple species. With different atmospheric zones and seating arrangements, the judges were a panel of 7, representing 7 different species, all chosen for their reputation for fairness and strict interpretation of law. The lead judge was a Tarn named Elder Vex, nearly 400 years old, who had presided over the most important cases in recent galactic history. Warlord Thax sat in the defendant's area, bound but not mistreated, flanked by his command staff. He maintained his defiant expression, refusing to acknowledge the authority of the court. To him, this was all weakness. Ceremony instead of strength. Words instead of action. Director Jin-Ho began the proceedings with a simple statement. This trial is not about revenge. It's not about punishment for its own sake. It's about justice. About demonstrating that even in war, even in conflict, there are lines that cannot be crossed. The defendants crossed those lines deliberately, publicly, and with full knowledge of what they were doing. The evidence was presented methodically. The broadcast of the executions shown in full to the court. Every species in the gallery watched in silence as the 37 died on screen. Many looked away. Some left the chamber. But the judges watched everything. their expressions unreadable. These were not combatants killed in battle, Ginho explained, his voice steady, despite the horrific images. These were prisoners of war, held in captivity, helpless, and under the defendant's direct control. Their execution violated every principle of civilized warfare. Every treaty, every convention that has been agreed upon by the Galactic Council. Witness after witness took the stand. Varrock soldiers who had participated in the executions, now prisoners themselves, testified about the orders they'd received, about how deliberate it all was, about how Warlord Thax had personally ordered the women killed first, specifically to maximize psychological impact. He wanted to hurt them, one Vrak soldier testified, his voice shaking. Not just kill them, hurt them. Make the male prisoners watch. Make humanity watch. He said it would show the galaxy that we were strong and they were weak. But perhaps the most powerful testimony came from the Vrak's prisoners who had been captured by human forces. One by one, they took the stand and described their treatment. Medical care. Adequate food. Respect. Dignity. A Vrak's officer named Karn spoke carefully, choosing his words with obvious thought. I was wounded when my ship was disabled. A human medical team treated me immediately. They stabilized my injuries, gave me pain medication, transported me to a hospital ship. I asked the doctor why. Why save an enemy? She said, because that's what we do. That's what it means to be human. He paused, looking directly at Warlord Thax. I have fought in 17 battles. I have been trained since childhood to value strength above all else. But I learned something in that human hospital. Strength without honor is just brutality. Power without restraint is just evil. We were wrong. We were wrong about everything. The contrast was devastating. The gallery watched footage of the 37's execution side by side with footage of Vrak's, prisoners receiving medical care from human doctors. The difference was stark, undeniable, and utterly damning. Warlord Thax finally spoke in his own defense. He stood before the court, massive and unrepentant, and addressed the judges with open contempt. I did what was necessary, what was right by my people's values. The Vraks do not show weakness. We do not coddle our enemies. These humans came to our territory with their soft words and their weak principles. I showed them what happens to the weak in this galaxy. I would do it again. Elder Vex, the lead judge, studied Thax for a long moment. And that is precisely why you are here. Because you would do it again. Because you see no wrong in what you did. Because you believe that might makes right and mercy is weakness. It is weakness, Thax insisted. The strong take what they want. The weak perish. That is the law of nature. No, Elder Vex replied quietly. That is the law of beasts. We are not beasts. We are civilized beings who have agreed to live by certain principles. You violated those principles in the most horrific way possible, and you did so deliberately to send a message. That message has been received, but perhaps not in the way you intended. The defense tried to argue cultural differences, claiming that Vrak society had different values regarding warfare and prisoners. It was a weak argument, and everyone knew it. The Vraks had signed the Galactic Conventions on Warfare. They had agreed to the same rules as every other species. They didn't get to violate those rules and claim cultural exemption. Director Ginho's closing statement was brief. He stood before the court and spoke with quiet intensity. The defendants want to claim they were strong, that their actions demonstrated power. I submit that their actions demonstrated nothing but cowardice. It takes no strength to murder helpless prisoners. It takes no courage to kill those who cannot fight back. True strength is what humanity demonstrated. They had the power to destroy the Varax Empire completely. They chose restraint. They chose justice. That choice, that restraint while possessing overwhelming force, that is real strength, that is what civilization looks like. The judges deliberated for 2 days. During that time, the galaxy waited. Would the court convict? Would they impose real consequences? Or would this be another example of justice delayed and denied? When the judges returned, Elder Vex read the verdict personally. We have reviewed all evidence presented. We have considered the arguments of both prosecution and defense. We have examined the relevant treaties and conventions. Our verdict is unanimous. He paused, his ancient eyes moving across the defendants. On all counts, we find the defendants guilty of war crimes. The execution of prisoners of war, the deliberate targeting of non-combatants, the violation of every principle of civilized warfare. The sentence for these crimes is life imprisonment in a maximum security facility under Galactic Court supervision. The defendants will never be free. They will spend the remainder of their lives remembering what they did and why it was wrong.
Thax.
Warlord Thax roared in fury, struggling against his restraints. You call this justice? This weakness. I should have killed more of them. I should have destroyed every human I could find. Elder Vex's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. And there it is. The proof that you learned nothing. That you remain a threat to every civilized being in this galaxy. Take them away. As the defendants were led from the courtroom, Warlord Thax locked eyes with Supreme Commander Day One, who sat in the gallery watching silently. You're weak, Thax spat. You should have destroyed us all when you had the chance. You should have killed every Vrax in the Empire. But you didn't, because you're soft. Because you're afraid to do what's necessary. Day One stood slowly. He walked to where the guards held Thax, looked up at the massive warlord, spoke quietly enough that only those nearby could hear. We could have... We didn't. Not because we're weak. Not because we're afraid. But because we're human. Because we understand something you never will. The difference between justice and revenge. The difference between strength and cruelty. The difference between civilization and savagery. It's what separates us from you. It's why you're in chains and we're not. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back. You took 37 lives. You thought it would make you look strong? Instead, you revealed exactly how weak you are. How afraid you are of anything you don't understand. Enjoy your cell, Warlord. You'll have a long time to think about your choices. Outside the courtroom, the Vrax Empire formally surrendered. The civilian government, now in control, signed treaties agreeing to reparations, disarmament, and oversight by Galactic Council peacekeepers. The territory they'd been fighting for was returned to the Pellan colony. Their military was reduced to defensive forces only, but more significantly, the Vrax people themselves began to change. Schools started teaching about the executions, about the war, about what had gone wrong, about how their culture's obsession with strength had led them to commit atrocities that brought them to the edge of destruction. A memorial was built on Vrax Prime itself. 37 pillars of stone, each bearing a name. Captain Minji Choi, Dr. Sora Lee, all of them. The memorial was placed in the center of their capital city, impossible to ignore. A constant reminder of what happened when cruelty was mistaken for strength. Young Vrax children would visit the memorial with their parents, who would explain what had been done, what it had cost, and why it must never happen again. The galaxy watched all of this and understood that something fundamental had changed. Humanity had revealed itself, not as the gentle peacekeepers everyone thought they knew, but as something far more complex. A species capable of terrible violence who chose mercy instead. A species powerful enough to destroy but disciplined enough to rebuild. Ambassador Krell of the Tarn gave a speech before the Galactic Council that would be remembered for generations. We thought we understood humans. We were wrong. They are not weak because they choose peace. They are terrifying because they choose peace despite being capable of such destruction. Every other species in this chamber fights because they must. Humans fight only when they choose to. Pray you never see them make that choice again. The words hung in the air of the council chamber. Every ambassador present understood. Humanity had been gentle because they wanted to be, not because they had to be. That choice could be revoked. And no one, absolutely no one, wanted to be responsible for making humanity choose war again. The trial was over. Justice had been served, but its effects would ripple through the galaxy for centuries to come. 3 months after the trial, Earth looked different. Not in obvious ways. The cities were the same. The sky was still blue. People still went to work, raised families, lived their lives, but something fundamental had shifted in how humans saw themselves and how they moved through the galaxy. The monuments to the 37 stood in every human settlement now. Simple structures of stone and metal, bearing names that would never be forgotten. Captain Minji Choi, Dr. Sora Lee, 23. Women and 14 men who had gone to make peace and never came home. Supreme. Commander Daewon Park stood before the monument in Beijing on a cold morning, his breath misting in the early air. Around him, thousands had gathered for the 3-month anniversary. They came every week, these quiet vigils where people left flowers and stood in silence. No speeches, no ceremonies, just memory and presence. A young girl approached the monument, maybe 7 years old, holding her grandmother's hand. She placed a small flower at the base of one name and looked up at the old woman. "Tell me about her again," the girl said softly. The grandmother's voice was thick with emotion. "That's your mother, Captain Minji Choi. She was a doctor. She spent her life saving people from every species in the galaxy. She died trying to make peace. She died believing in a better future. Will there be peace now?" the girl asked. The grandmother looked at Daewon, who had overheard the exchange. Their eyes met briefly. "I hope so," she said finally. "I hope your mother's death meant something." Daewon wanted to promise that it had. Wanted to say that everything was better now, but he stayed silent because he wasn't sure yet. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had changed. Whether those changes led to lasting peace, or just a different kind of conflict remained to be seen. The Galactic Council chambers had changed too. Human ambassadors still attended, still participated in debates and votes. But now they sat in different seats, moved through different corridors. The Council had passed what they called the Human Protocols, a series of measures that acknowledged humanity's new status in galactic politics. Permanent Security Council membership. The right to maintain military forces at levels previously restricted to older, more established species. Most significantly, formal acknowledgement that humanity's restraint during the Vrax War was a choice, not a limitation, and that future aggressors should not mistake mercy for weakness. Ambassador Junho Lee, who had replaced the previous ambassador after the war, addressed the Council during the first session after the protocols were adopted. "We appreciate the Council's recognition," he said carefully, "but we want to be clear about something. We did not want this. We did not want to reveal our military capability. We did not want to fight a war. We wanted to continue as we were, as peacekeepers and diplomats. The Vrax took that choice from us. They forced us to show the galaxy what we're capable of. We hope, more than anything, that we never have to do so again." His words were diplomatic, measured, appropriate for the Council chambers. But every species present heard the underlying message. Humanity could do it again if they had to. And next time, there might not be as much restraint. In the weeks following the war, human military technology became a source of intense interest across the galaxy. The quantum jump capability alone represented a breakthrough that would revolutionize space travel and warfare. Species offered fortunes for access to the technology. Research institutions begged for collaboration. Humanity's response was carefully calculated. They released some technology to the Galactic Archive. Enough to prove they were still committed to galactic cooperation. Enough to demonstrate good faith. But only a fraction of what they actually possessed. Commander Haeon Kim, now Admiral, oversaw the technology disclosure process. He stood in a secure facility on Mars, watching as engineers carefully redacted classified information from technical documents before release. "They want everything," an analyst said, reviewing requests from various species. The Keller are offering exclusive trade rights. The Tarn want a technology sharing agreement. Even the Pellin, who we saved, are asking for access to our weapons systems. "Give them what we agreed to give them," Hyun replied. "Nothing more. Let them wonder what else we have. Let them imagine. Sometimes imagination is more effective than reality." The analyst looked troubled. "Sir, Isn't that kind of intimidation exactly what we fought against? Using fear as a tool? High-End considered the question seriously. Maybe. But there's a difference between threatening violence and demonstrating capability. We're not saying we'll attack anyone. We're just making it clear that attacking us would be a mistake. That's not aggression. That's deterrence. Where's the line between the two? I don't know, Yoon admitted. But we need to figure it out. Because if we become what we fought against, if we use fear and power the way the Vrax did, then what was the point? Why did 37 people die if we just become another empire? It was a question that haunted humanity in those months after the war. They'd won. They'd achieved justice. But at what cost to their own principles? To their identity as a species? The debate raged in universities, government chambers, and homes across human space. Some argued that humanity had finally grown up, finally accepted the reality that peace only exists when backed by strength. Others warned that they were losing something essential, something that made them different from the aggressive species that dominated galactic history. Dr. Junho Bei, a philosopher who had written extensively about human ethics, gave a lecture that became famous for crystallizing the debate. "We are not the same species we were 4 months ago," he told an audience of thousands. "We cannot be. We've seen what we're capable of. We've used weapons we swore we'd never deploy. We've fought a war with efficiency that terrifies even ourselves. The question isn't whether we've changed. The question is whether we can control what we've become." He paused, his expression grave. "For 32 years we chose to be gentle. We chose peace. We chose restraint. Those choices defined us. But now we've made a different choice. We've shown that we can fight, that we can win, that we can be as dangerous as any species in the galaxy. Can we choose to be gentle again? Or have we opened a door we can't close?" The question had no easy answer, and perhaps that was appropriate. Perhaps it was a question each generation of humans would have to answer for themselves. Across the galaxy, other species watched humanity's internal struggle with interest and concern. The aggressive empires quietly revised their expansion plans, marking human territory as off-limits. Pirates disappeared from human shipping lanes overnight. Slavers who had occasionally taken human captives released every single one and swore never to target them again. The Vrax Empire, now governed by a civilian council, worked hard to rebuild their relationship with the galaxy. They paid reparations. They reformed their military culture. They sent delegations to human worlds to formally apologize for what had been done. One such delegation visited Earth itself, led by a young Vrax named Kren, who had been a student when the war happened. He stood before the monument in Beijing, surrounded by security, but also by curious humans who wanted to see if reconciliation was possible. "I cannot undo what was done," Kren said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "I cannot bring back those who were murdered, but I can stand here and acknowledge that it was wrong, that my species committed an atrocity, that we have no excuse. We can only learn, change, and try to be better." He placed a wreath at the base of the monument, a Vrax tradition for honoring the dead. Many in the crowd were crying. Some were angry. All were conflicted. An old woman stepped forward. It was Minji Choi's mother, the grandmother who had brought her granddaughter to the memorial. She looked at Kren for a long moment, studying his face, seeing genuine remorse there. "My daughter believed in peace," she said finally. "She died for it. I will not dishonor her memory by refusing to accept your apology. Understand this. We will never forget. These names will remain here forever. And if your species ever forgets what happened, if you ever return to your old ways, humanity will remember, and we will respond." It was both forgiveness and warning, reconciliation and threat. The duality that defined humanity now. Months turned into a year. The immediate aftermath of the war faded into history, though its effects remained. Humanity's reputation had transformed permanently. They were no longer seen as the gentle peacekeepers, though they still performed that role. They were now understood as something more complex, species that preferred peace but was more than capable of war. A people who valued life but would fight to protect their own. Admiral Haeon Kim stood on the bridge of a new ship, watching stars. stream past as they traveled to a diplomatic conference on the far side of the galaxy. He thought about Commander Day One's original crew, about the people they'd been trying to save through negotiation, about how different things might have been if the Vrax had simply talked instead of killed. "We're approaching the conference station," his tactical officer reported. "Multiple species vessels in the area. They're giving us wide berth. Acknowledge their courtesy," Hayan ordered. "And remind the crew that we're here as diplomats, not conquerors. We represent humanity's best nature, not our capacity for violence." "Understood, sir." But as they approached the station, as other vessels moved carefully aside to let them pass, Hayan knew the truth. Humanity would always represent both now. Their capacity for compassion and their capacity for war. Their desire for peace and their ability to win conflicts. That duality was their burden and their strength. In his quarters later, Hayan reviewed a message from Earth. A young cadet at the military academy had written to him, asking for advice about whether to pursue a military career or follow their dream of becoming a doctor. Hayan thought carefully about his response. Finally, he wrote, "Do both. Become a doctor. Learn to save lives, but also understand how to protect them. That's what it means to be human now. We hope for peace. We train for war. We value life. We prepare to defend it. The galaxy knows what we can do in conflict. Make sure you also show them what we can do in peace." He sent the message and returned to the observation deck, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, the 37 had been murdered for trying to make peace. Somewhere out there, monuments bearing their names stood as reminders of what happened when humanity's better nature was met with cruelty. The galaxy had learned. Humanity had learned too. A junior officer approached hesitantly. "Admiral, permission to speak freely?" "Granted." "Sir, do you think we did the right thing? Fighting the war the way we did?" Hayan considered the question. "I think we did what we had to do. Whether it was right or wrong, history will decide. All I know is that 37 people died because they believed in peace. We honored them by seeking justice, not revenge. By showing restraint even when we had the power to destroy. If that's not right, then I don't know what is." The officer nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. But Hayan knew it wasn't complete. Knew that the question of right and wrong in warfare could never be fully answered. All anyone could do was try to act with honor, with restraint, with the understanding that power without wisdom was just another form of evil. The ship moved on through the stars. Behind them, Earth continued its vigils for the 37. Across the galaxy, species adjusted to a new reality where humanity was no longer underestimated. And imprisoned scattered across neutral space, Varric's war criminals served their sentences. Forever marked by the crimes they'd committed against people who had only wanted peace, the galaxy had changed. Humanity had changed. And in that change, perhaps, lay the hope that such atrocities would never be repeated. That the next time conflict arose, all sides would remember what happened when humanity was pushed too far. They would remember the 37. They would remember the war that followed. They would remember that humanity's mercy was a choice, not a weakness, and they would choose differently. That, in the end, was what justice meant. Not revenge, not punishment for its own sake, but change, understanding. The hope that learning from tragedy could prevent future ones. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to balance the scales or bring back the dead. But it was something. And for humanity. For the galaxy, for the future, it would have to do. The ship sailed on through the endless night, carrying humanity's dual nature into the stars. Gentle when they could be, terrible when they had to be. Always human, always capable of both, and the galaxy would never forget what that meant.